In comparing elementary to secondary MTSS implementation, some critical differences include: first, because of the smaller size of the schools and the smaller size of the students' learning gaps, as well as less infrastructure issues, implementation of MTSS happens more quickly in the elementary schools. By implementation, we mean when a multi-tiered systems of support framework is truly embedded in the culture. It becomes just how we do business. In elementary, this takes 3 to 5 years of continual work, and for secondary, it's more like 6 to 9. Next, because the focus in elementary is proactively identifying skill gaps, typically reading and math, and because students are new to schooling, screening tools like STAR and AIMSweb are needed. In secondary, the focus is on identifying those who are in need. We usually already have a ton of existing historical data readily available: previous screening data, state test scores, grades, attendance, discipline, that would show us well in advance which students are at the greatest risk. Existing data may be an effective part of your screening process for secondary students. Because in elementary we are catching gaps early while they are small, students typically move sequentially from Tier 1 to Tier 2, targeted, and so on. In secondary, you may get students who are new to your district who enter with large deficits. A targeted Tier 2 intervention may not be sufficient to address this need, and the student may jump to Tier 3 immediately. Another common misunderstanding is that people assume that intervention programs, screening tools, etc., that have a research base at the elementary level will work at secondary as well. This simply isn't true. By secondary, we have larger, more complex skill gaps, less time to address these issues, and we are now working with teenagers who have experienced failure year after year and who are likely disengaging. Therefore, secondary interventions must be more intensive, with motivational aspects embedded throughout and peer involvement. Finally, in the sequence, elementary school models typically and incrementally move to more intensive levels, whereby secondary models can be more like finding the most discrepant groups of students, the furthest from where we want them to be, and working diligently to move them back to where they are able to re-engage with the core. From the high school tiered interventions work of the National Center on RTI and the National High School Center, we know that high schools particularly struggle with the following aspects. Focus. The design and implementation of all the essential elements of a multi-tiered systems of support are dependent on what the school's focus is. While in elementary, it is often focused on learning to read or do math. As students get older, barriers to learning change as well. Maybe students aren't attending regularly. Maybe they're disengaged. Maybe data shows high rates of depression and anxiety across many students. Secondary MTSS models depend heavily on the focus, which should come from that school's data problem-solving process. Culture. School culture plays an integral role in the adoption and implementation of any new initiative. A school's culture provides implicit, and sometimes explicit, guidance about beliefs, behaviors, and what is acceptable within an organization. Adopting a multi-tiered framework in high school likely would require a significant shift in a school's culture. For example, staff members may need to collaborate in new ways. Related service providers may need to push in or coach rather than pull out. Various role groups might have to work together to analyze data in ways they did not before, and agree philosophically that the success of all students is the responsibility of all staff members. Instructional Organization. The instructional organization, or school schedule of high schools, creates challenges. Meeting students' needs requires flexibility in the scheduling and in the delivery of interventions for students, as well as collaborative time for teachers and related service providers. When implementing tiered interventions, considerations should be addressed when developing the master schedule as well as the school calendar, including student access to tiered supports, time for teachers and other staff members to collaborate, time for teachers to analyze and discuss data, and movement between the tiers flexibly. Staff roles. High school teachers often view themselves as teachers of content and not necessarily equipped to teach struggling learners, students with learning differences, or multilingual learners. But addressing the needs of these marginalized groups better actually improves the teaching and learning for all students. Most high school MTSS involves school-wide work on improving general education's ability to meet school-wide needs. Often there are specialists in the building, different ones depending on your school-wide goal, who may normally work in isolation but could be integral to leading school improvement efforts if roles evolved, ideally with coaching and a multiple-year professional learning plan dedicated to the school-wide goal. Student involvement. Student voice in secondary school MTSS is essential, a non-negotiable. If high school data shows that a particular student group has more barriers to learning than others, it is that student group whose voice and active engagement is critically needed. Stakeholder engagement. High schools frequently engage a variety of external stakeholders, including parents and family members, community and business partners, tutors, volunteers, in supporting instructional and extracurricular activities. Some students also receive wraparound services from social service agencies. These various stakeholders can provide valuable support for a school's tiered intervention framework. Implementation and alignment. With the numerous other initiatives and activities being implemented simultaneously in many high schools, it is critical to align efforts that can support and accelerate the implementation of a multi-tiered system. A detailed scaling up plan may be useful for incrementally expanding the focus and scope of the framework. Instruction and assessment resources. Scant research on the efficacy of core, supplemental, and intensive instruction with struggling learners in grades 9 through 12 exists. Additionally, few measures are appropriate for screening or progress monitoring purposes that have been validated for use with high school students. School leaders will need to make decisions about how to provide appropriate instruction and assessment using innovative methods.